And welcome everyone. As we get into our exciting course on programming, we are going to focus on learning Java, which is a programming language. So obviously we have a lot of different terminologies, things that we're going to hit right away and really hard. So with that being said, let's jump right in. Let's get started by first asking the question, what is Java? You might have heard of it, or even maybe JavaScript, which is not the same thing. They just share a common name. Well, Java is a programming language. It was first developed in 1981 by James Gosling and Sun Microsystems, and it was needed to be used across a variety of platforms to simplify the coding process. They wanted a programming language that could function kind of like C++, but didn't have to have the necessary restrictions of being tied to a particular operating system. Today, Java is integrated into numerous applications due to its ability to be cross-platform, so it's a very widely used programming language. Now, of course, Java is just one example of what we call an object-oriented programming language. C++, C# are examples of some other ones. There are numerous other object-oriented programming languages, and there are programming languages which aren't object-oriented. But the ones that we're going to be focusing on, of course, are object-oriented, particularly Java. So let's actually get started with programming instead of just simply talking hypotheticals. So first, we need to define this term that we already heard. Object-oriented programming, or OOP. Well, what is an object-oriented programming language? Well, in a OOP, the code that we're going to write is constructed of quote-unquote objects. They're given properties that are then manipulated by code. Programming languages such as Java are typically written inside of an IDE or an integrated development environment. An IDE that we shall be using for our learning of Java, of course, is Eclipse. And then, of course, there are many others such as IntelliJ, NetBeans, etc. There's numerous ones out there that you can use. But again, we're going to look at Eclipse, which is one of the more widely used platforms. Now, what is an object? All right, we're looking at these terminologies and we're going to dive a little deeper. Well, let's just first start by representing an object with a box. A three-dimensional box, nothing special about it, right? Well, we can look at that box and say, hey, it has properties or things that we can define about it, such as length, width, height. I mean, we can get into further detail. We can say things like, hey, what material is it? How thick is the material? Things like that. Does it have a lid? But let's just stick with those three dimensions for a moment. Well, just based on length, width, and height, we can calculate things about that box, such as surface area and volume. Now, each of these properties have some kind of arithmetic or logical operation, and we call that a method. Now, a method is sometimes also called a function, which, if you have any recollection from math, that might sound kind of familiar. Well, that's simply just a procedure that tells the code to carry out a certain task. So, for example, if we wanted to count the volume of this box, we do length times width times height, right? So that is the procedure. The function is length times width times height equals volume, and we would call that a method in Java. Now, one of the very first programs that we typically look at when we're looking at a new programming language is Hello World. And this is a very simple Hello World program in Java. Public class Hello World, public static void main string args, system.out.println Hello World. Well, what does this code actually do? Well, let's kind of break it down line by line. Public class Hello World is simply just going to be our name and the type of the class. And we'll look at all those as we get further into programming 1, and maybe if you go into programming 2, you will see a little bit more of what some of these definitions kind of can really do. We have public static void main string args. That's our next line, and of course it tells the program to look here for the main line of execution. That's why we have the keyword main. System.out.println Hello World tells the program to print to the console whatever's inside the quotes. And that's a key thing to keep in mind here. When I look at those quotes and anything I put in there, it's going to be printed out. That means if I wanted this to say Hello Universe, instead of putting in quotes Hello World, I could have it say Hello Universe. So with this print line statement that we just have, what do all those basic parts do, right? And we kind of have talked about this a little bit, but if we look at this and says, if we put quotes like Hello World or Hello Universe, Hello whatever's in those quotes, right? It's saying print out whatever's inside those parentheses. Now, with that print line, you notice it's system.out.println. Well, that period has a very important meaning. Never forget putting it in there. If you don't put it in there, you're going to run into problems with your code. the most important thing to know about that period is what it's doing is invoking. All right, so it invokes the object. In this case, the object is called system. It's part of the system class. And of course, that's a little bit further scope we'll talk about later. But the important thing you need to know is that those dots are what are making the things happen. And it's calling a method within system.out called println. Now, we'll look at methods a little later on and how to write our own. But for now, we just simply need to get familiar with this terminology. And the way we can think about that right now is we can think about, well, whatever's inside of that method is right now just sending a message. So anytime I do a print line, I'm sending a message to the user saying, hey, here's this thing that I want you to read. Now, one kind of little thing to note is whatever we put inside of a parentheses. All right, we already said, well, print whatever's inside the parentheses, right? Well, technically, the terminology that we will use for that is called an argument. So whenever we put something into parentheses, whether it's in quotations or not, because we'll see examples later on where we don't put things in quotations, but whatever we put inside there, that is an argument. All right, this provides the information for the method to carry out its assignment. All right, let's take a look real quick at another example program. So here I have public class sample program, public static void main string args. Okay, so far so good. It's pretty much the same thing as what we saw, except for we have a different name to our class. Okay. System.out.println hello reader, system.out.println welcome to Java. And if you look at this, it's almost the exact same as what we had with hello world, but now we don't have just one println statement, we have two println statements. So now that we have some examples and we have some background knowledge, let's actually look at how could we code something like our hello world program or something like this sample program that we have. All right, so here I am inside of Eclipse and I have a brand new workspace created here. So if you are first starting, you're probably going to see something similar to this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and create a Java project. I can also just click that, or I can right click in here to do that as well when later we get things created. But I'm going to first start by creating a Java project. And you'll notice it opens up a new window for me. And so what I want to do is I want to get in the habit of naming these well. So for example, when you start working on your programming labs, you might want to get in the habit of naming them a certain way. So for example, I might call this lab 1, and that would be it, right? Of course, you'll notice it says it's not a valid identifier. All right, and that's because with Java, it doesn't like white spaces in the name. So it had to put like lab 1. And if you notice now, it's happy because again, it doesn't like those spaces in there. All right. This, of course, is just your default location, wherever you created it. You can keep this here. Most of the time, what we're doing is going to be fine. I do recommend that you uncheck this right here. Make sure this is unchecked. Create module info.java file. For our purposes, you do not need this checked here. So you can just leave this unchecked for now. And then all we're going to do is go ahead and click Finish. And then Eclipse will build the folder right here for us. So here I have lab 1. And I'm going simply to right-click on this. And then I'm going to do a new, and you can see we got the Java project again, but we don't want to make another project. We already created one. Instead, we want to create a class. And when I create class, you can see we now have our source folder, lab 1, and we have a name. So what do we want to call this? Well, maybe I want to call this hello reader, all right, because we had one called hello world, maybe hello reader. We could call it hello universe, whatever we want to call it. This is where we are going to name our class, and whatever name is here is going to show up in our code in just a second. Now, I do recommend that you go ahead and click this little checkbox right here. This is public static void main string, because that's going to save you from having to type that out. So always go ahead and click that. Now, there are some other options in here that you can do, but we're not going to worry about creating those at this time. Instead, we're just going to make sure this first one is checked. You can uncheck this one here with inherited abstract methods if you want. It's not really going to affect anything. Let's go ahead and click Finish. All right, you will see that it has created a file over here in my Explorer, and it opened it up here, hellouniverse.java. And we can see we have public class, hello universe. It's public static void main string args. Awesome, this looks very familiar. We have something new here that we haven't seen in our sample code. I'm not going to worry about this right now. In fact, I'm just going to hit the delete key and take that right on out of there. And now let's go ahead and put that sample code that we saw before in. So system.out.println, and you can see as I type this, it starts suggesting. I can actually hit enter there for it to fill that in. And I want to go ahead and put a message in here. So inside these parentheses, let's put in our quotes, and let's do hello universe, like we saw before. And that's all that's to it. Let's go ahead and click the save button. It's always good to save our code periodically. And hit run. And it will compile our code here. And just give it a second. And you will see down here in the console, hello universe. And that's exactly what we put in here. Now if I add another line of code real quick, system.out.println. Let's just say another line of code. And you notice I do have this squiggle here. One thing I want to point out, if you don't forget to put something in here, notice how I always have a semicolon here at the end. Oh, that means that I forgot something here. So this red squiggle is here to kind of tell us, hey, you might have forgot to put something in here. And you can also see this little red X right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit semicolon. And you'll see that takes care of that error now. So I can go ahead and save and run my code. And you'll see that it updates our program now to say hello universe, another line of code. All right, so there we go. We've taken our first step into a larger programming world. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that we can do, but I think this is a good first step here, is being able to learn how to go in and simply just create a program and then be able to run it.